Bill and Melinda came across an article in the New York Times in 1998 by Nicholas Kristof about 3 million kids around the globe dying from diarrhea. And they knew they had to help. So they started the Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation today is the biggest philanthropic donor in the world, having immense impact on global health and saved lives of dozens of millions of people. And just in 2025, the budget of the Gates Foundation, the operating budget, is over $8 billion US. It's a gigantic donor, and it's filling a space, especially in the context of, struggle for international development funding, a very important space. So that's through an article that they read in the New York Times, and a lot of big philanthropists rallied their cause, and like Warren Buffett and others through the years. So I think we'll talk about these kind of stories today. So I'd love to have you introduce yourselves briefly, and maybe we can start with you, Miriam, because you've been working with Unilever for many years and calling brands to have an impact as well. So if you can tell a few words about your journey at Unilever, how you managed and achieved impact through some of your specific storytelling or awareness-raising campaigns, and what is Brands on a Mission, and maybe talk about your book very briefly, but maybe a 30 seconds intro, and then we go to Sam.
Absolutely.
And Kasia.
Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here at the Polish Business Hub, and my esteemed fellow panelists as well. So a little bit about myself. I'm Professor Miriam Sidibe. I'm the founder and chief mission officer of a company called Brands on a Mission. But I think before I jump into how I got to this and to believing in the power of storytelling in terms of driving social impact and making real impact, you need to go back to my humble beginnings. So I'm a UN child. I grew up with parents that spent all their life, working for the most vulnerable in this world. And then, went to school, went to university, managed to do a PhD that ended up being focused on hand washing with soap, because that's what I got the funding for. Then I went to present my findings to Unilever. And then Unilever said, oh my goodness, we're the world's largest soap manufacturer. So they said, look, why don't you come and join us and then see what you can do when you are sitting down from a company to try to do some things around driving hand washing with soap. I think all of us know the importance of hand washing with soap. During COVID, that was probably the only thing that could save a lot of people from actually contracting COVID. Now, the key thing for me was looking at my parents and the way I was brought up, looking at a woman in Africa and seeing her as a beneficiary. Right? This woman, everybody was giving her aid because she needed a bar of soap, she needed a toilet, but she wasn't necessarily using it. And then here I went to Unilever, and she was being called a beneficiary. And then I went to Unilever, and then that same woman, I had this entire big 80 billion euro company who was actually spending all their best resources to look at this woman, calling her the consumer, that same African woman, because she had 50 Kenya shilling in her pocket. And that 50 Kenya shilling in her pocket determined the kind of soap, color, smell that she wanted. And so I fell in love, and I fell in love with the word consumer. Because consumers meant that this woman was now empowered, and we were looking at her with a lot more dignified eyes than actually as a beneficiary. Anyway, so this is the real motivation for me. So I spent 15 years in Unilever. I run the world's largest hand washing program, reaching over 1 billion people in over 35 countries, helped build the Lifebuoy brand that's now over 1 billion euro, created the UN Global Hand Washing Day. You can watch my TED Talk, The Simple Power of Hand Washing with Soap. Was named one of the 100 most influential Africans. Went to Harvard Kennedy School, wrote my book after my 15 years in Unilever, and then, which is basically the framework to help those brands and companies bridge the divide between what they say and what they do, because there's a huge difference. And if you want to drive impact, we need to focus around the do. So that's the essence of the book, and that's the essence of the company that I now drive, is to help more companies and brands accelerate their impact in this world.
Thanks, Miriam. That's a great intro to the conversation today. Thanks for sharing that. Sam, I think you have a similar starting story as the Gates Foundation with the End Fund, right? Can you tell us a bit more about that and what the End Fund is?
Thank you. So I'm Sam Mayer, Vice President at the End Fund. The End Fund is a vehicle for private collaborative philanthropy. And as Alex rightly said, Our founders, who were themselves private sector investors, looking for an opportunity for their own personal philanthropy, read in a newspaper one day that, according to an expert at Imperial College in London, with a little bit of money and a little bit of imagination, they could really transform the lives of a very large number of people. And of course, this piqued their interest as philanthropists. Fast forward several years and pilot projects and more and more success and intrigue, they themselves said, hang on a minute, we spend our days investing in funds that aggregate and allocate capital to achieve the returns that we want to achieve. Why can't we do this with our philanthropy as well? And thus the End Fund was born. And that's exactly what we were set up to do in 2012, the same year as the London Declaration on Neglected Tropical Diseases, which are the diseases we focus on, which pooled together commitments, extraordinarily generous commitments from the pharmaceutical industry of drug donations to treat these. And so the End Fund exists to aggregate capital to help pool with those drug donations and provide treatment to now, as of last year, over 230 million people a year across 30 countries. But we could not have done that were it not for the original inspiration of them reading about it in the newspaper. I should also say that the Financial Times is probably responsible for more of our growth than any work I have ever done, that's for certain. And that is because NTDs, as they're called, neglected tropical diseases, have been highlighted by our journalists in the Financial Times several times, and that has reached the right audience. And it's reached the right audience through the right medium that they trust because they read it every single day. And as a result, they picked up the phone and called us because we're quoted in articles. And thus they are board members now to us. They are strategic advisors. And probably the most important work that they do for us is not only to fund the work and to advise us strategically, but also to call their friends and to crowd in other resources and use their influence on our behalf. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Sam. That's a great segue to introduce Kasia Kelly and the role of media in philanthropy and raising awareness for important issues. So, Kasia, you've been having a long career with Discovery Channel. You're now the CEO of TVN, the largest TV network in Poland. Can you tell us a bit more about your journey and how you've worked in that space, the connection between media and philanthropy and impact?
Well, you just described the connection, but it's not the only connection. Yes, I am the CEO of TVN. TVN is the biggest commercial broadcaster in Poland. I'm sure that everybody who's Polish in this room knows the group very well. We have a variety of different products and channels. And we really have an impact. We have a big impact on a Polish society, on Polish people, both through our entertainment programs as well as news. We are the biggest news provider, local news provider in Poland. And we take it very seriously. I think that for me personally, if you have such a big reach and big impact on people, it's really important that we give back because it is about the connectivity and about shaping also the future and shaping kind of the way we interact with the communities we are in. And I think that there are several ways in which we are actually acting from kind of storytelling, and that's both on entertainment side as well as on the news side. We are, after all, if anything happens, if anything is going on in Poland, people turn to us. People want to see what's on the news and what's credible news, and that's where it's on one hand the news stories, on the other hand the entertainment stories, which really shape the world. I believe, because it is about in the past it was about the word and the discussion and the stories that we told to people. Now it's maybe more visual. But it is, when we are at our best, we can really make a difference. And then another aspect is actually for us to be a platform to different organizations that are actually doing, philanthropic work. And we can highlight that, as you mentioned, the Financial Times. We do a lot of that. Actually, this Sunday, We have a biggest event, I would say philanthropic event in Poland, WOŚP, which is a huge nationwide, I would say now worldwide event, which we cover and we produce and we do a live coverage and we shape and help in collecting a lot of money. It's not the only one we work with. We work with a number, different ones. And most importantly also, we have our own foundation. Our own foundation, TVN Foundation, which really grew out of our roots, the roots of interventional journalism. Okay, so we had, intervention journalists that would go and see different things happening, and they didn't have. It's now 20-something years ago. They didn't have really a tool how to help. And this is how the foundation started. It's now in a very different place, but we'll probably going to talk about that. Very different place, very professionally run. But that was really the roots. It was the roots to really make an impact and help.
Thank you. I think that's a good segue to. I go back to Miriam and notably the role of media. We often hear and lots of depressing news in media, and how do you interact with media outlets when you worked at Unilever or with the UN or others, or even for you, Sam? I think this question is valid as well. To partner with them or to even educate some journalists on the cause, so you get a bigger media coverage. What's your experience in that when you want to transform the way media is talking about, I don't know, Africa's development, Africa's economy, beneficiaries versus consumers? How do you connect with the right media outlets, or how do you form partnerships with the allies, as Sam was talking about earlier?
Yeah, so I think media is essential. I think they shape the norms in societies. And if you think about the continent where I'm sitting, I'm actually based out of Nairobi, even though Brands on a Mission is a global company. You think about 50% of the population being African and young women that are being held back because of societal norms and the structural biases. I think the role of media is critical in portraying what's expected out of a woman, what's in terms of shaping what masculinity is. And so if you want to have an in-way into, positive masculinity, if you want to have an in-way in terms of, having a real impact on gender-based violence, for example, I can't see a better partner than working with the media, because that is what can give us an idea around, what should we be looking forward to in terms of what positivity is. But I'm going to take an example around something that we did during COVID. So during COVID, we established the National Business Compact against coronavirus, and we put together around 30 different companies. And the key important thing during COVID was to make sure that people were practicing behavior. It was all around hand washing with soap, wearing your mask, social distancing. These are all behaviors, and the best way you do that is to work with, beside making sure that people have access to water and soap and all of that, but they also need to have access to messages and storytelling, and then making sure that we partnered with the different target audiences so that people understand this applies to me, because there was this myth that we're young and we are invincible Africans and young people, and they were like, this has nothing to do with us. But making sure that the stories were being told by some of this digital agency. We were working, for example, with Shuja's well-told story. We were trying to figure out, how to come up with a narrative so that the young person knows that it's also your responsibility to take care of the elder, because there could be something that actually you can pass back on. So there's not this sense of being invincible. And I think the way you create this narrative and how you write those stories to be able to drive and impact behavior is critical, because it is all around norms changing and influencing behaviors at a key junction in life.
Yeah. And so it's the awareness raising at the local level, but also at the larger level, and bringing science to the front stage, right? I think during COVID, all of us and most populations around the world were, for instance, were resistant to wearing the mask. In the US, in France, I live in Spain, the same thing. And so big TV networks had a big role there to bring sciences to the stage. And it's true, it's a good example to go through COVID and see how we managed to get scientists front and center and really educate the population on how to end the epidemics. So
I think it's on a number of levels because, in a sense, for us, number one, the most important thing was to inform. Yes, that was the kind of the key thing. It was really news. It was about informing, bringing experts, and making sure that people are informed. And this is one side of our business. And this is COVID. I have a lot of examples on that other cases as well. Obviously, one of the very tragic ones is the war in Ukraine and how we reacted to this. And I can tell the story in a moment. But let's stay with the COVID. So the number one was informing. And then to put this information into kind of an everyday life, okay? What does it mean for everyday life? And we created then a show. We have a show which is called Uwaga, Attention. It's a daily show, normally on TVN, which is mostly an interventionist journalism. So it's, journalists going to the places and discovering something. We turned this show immediately into Uwaga on COVID, which means, attention to COVID. And we had a daily show which we at that time filmed in a bus, in a public bus transportation, answering simple questions. If I am expecting a child, what should I do? How often should I wash my hands? What do I do in a public transportation? What I do here? Kind of just educating me. It's in prime time on the main channel, okay? Every day it was in prime time. Then we obviously also created a place where, in our daily shows, in our, the place where we talk about it. But what's also very important, for the networks like ours, we have a daily soap that has been on air forever, okay, 20 plus years. We write stories, we write scripts for that show.
what is it called?
It's called Na Wspólnej, which is a street. It's like Coronation Street, okay? It's the name of the street, and it kind of follows, neighbors, families, and so on and so on. It's been on air, as I said, daily for 20-something years. Because you write scripts for those shows, kind of ongoing, yeah? The everyday life, whatever that is, whether that's COVID or something else that, the society is actually fighting with or is being challenged or whatever, you can put in a storyline. And this is a little bit what you are saying.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Sam, you want to...
While we're on COVID, I have a couple of examples that may be interesting. I mean, the network of partners that we deliver treatment through are closest to the communities. And when I say the communities, I'm talking about the people, there are 1.6 billion, with a B, people in the world who need to be reached with treatment for the diseases we work on. Trachoma, river blindness, intestinal worms. And by far the most effective way to reach them is by community organizations, by people, leaders who are from the very same communities, because they are trusted. They speak the same language, they've had the same life experience, and they have a symbiotic relationship. And during COVID, their critical work was paused. Global NTD programming was paused. And as a result, a lot of people were at risk for going without treatment. And layer on top of that the challenges that we've heard about from a communication and an education standpoint. And so we were able to leverage the networks that we had, even although they had paused, to turn that challenge into an opportunity and create a COVID response fund, leveraging the trust that those organizations have to deliver the right messages. And so we were able to actually not only continue funding these grassroots organizations that need ongoing funding, otherwise they may fold, but also critically maintain that connection and that trust between the communities and these local leaders. So I think it's one really important example. And another complementary example during that, as it relates to media, as part of our COVID response fund, we raised money to invest in media campaigns. We partnered with WHO Afro and JC.co. Many of you will be familiar with the company. They post the billboards, digital and otherwise, around the world. And at the time, a lot of companies had stopped advertising in that physical way, or they had pressed pause on that ad budget because nobody was out on the streets. There wasn't an optimal time to advertise, and yet people still needed to get to work. There was, thousands of eyeballs every single day going by these. And so we were able to partner with them and WHO Afro to put WHO's messaging around hand washing and behavior change on the JC.co billboards, in tens of thousands of billboards around multiple countries in Africa. And, I I can't give you a specific number of people that it reached, of course, but it was an opportunity for philanthropy to come in and support the messaging of the regional body that was responsible for the right messaging to the right people at the right time.
Yeah, go ahead, Miriam.
Yeah, no, I just want to come, since we're still on COVID, before we move away from COVID, because I can actually give you numbers. And through the National Business Compact, which was primarily a partnership where media had a central role, we reached 130 million people. We raised over $10 million. So we built philanthropy through DFID at the time. There was DFID, Unilever, plus this response that was local. We reached 130 million across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. And think about this, like without the media, this amount of money is actually very little. But this actually, if you look at the response and what happened in COVID in these 3 countries, I mean, we hardly, the ministries of health in these countries will tell you that the campaign and the work that we did to get in right at the start was critical for mitigating. So these are the kind of numbers that we really need to look at. And without media, that's just not possible. That's just not possible because it's about creating the local shows in radio, in different languages, everywhere, making sure that radio is available, that the health worker that's going is equipped, can say, tune in at this time. It's not just a message, but, the environment is populated with those stories. So without media, you cannot drive the kind of change at that scale that we need.
Yeah, and there's a lot of explanation to do even with scientists, right? We often struggle to understand how we can have an impact as an individual on climate change, for instance.
Yeah.
And then we have the whole issue around social media, misinformation, disinformation, especially the current context with X and Zuckerberg, who called for more masculinity. We're talking about this. And so let's see how this translates in the coming month, right? And they're removing the safeguards and the checks on the information that's being published. So that's on the bad news. On the good news, we were talking about scripting earlier. Sam, you've produced recently a documentary film, a short film that you're running around the world for short film festivals, and it's very interesting. It's called The Fly Collectors. We had a screening here 2 days ago, but that's an example of a different type of production, different type of media partnership that you have with talented directors and film festivals, and hopefully maybe we'll see it on Netflix as well at some point, right? How do you measure?
On Polish television.
On Polish television, it'd be fantastic. Did you see it on Tuesday?
No.
Okay, so it's perfect opportunity to put it on TV and to watch it. But how do you measure the impact of an operation like this? I know it's you're in the midst of it, but what's your expectations for this type of communications strategies?
Thank you. There's a lot in that question. I think the first thing I'll tackle is the power of the storytelling itself. Personally, I think the power of any storytelling endeavor is directly correlated with the motivations behind it. If you start with perhaps a financial motivation, or you want to raise money, so that's your goal, that's where the energy is coming from. So what kind of media can we do in order to reach this financial goal? You are going to be inherently limited in generating the potential power from that story, and you actually risk potential harm. You actually risk co-opting the story and making it your own when it's not yours to tell. And I think what I'm getting at here is about authenticity. The more authentic a story is, and the more authentically it's told, the more powerful it can be. And so our starting point with this film was not to raise a certain amount of money or build a campaign or anything around it. Our starting point was inspiration. Niger became the first country to say publicly that they had eliminated river blindness as a public health problem in Africa. This is truly unprecedented in our space. And frankly, even a couple of years ago, scientifically, there was debate as to whether or not this is even possible. Now, there are a handful, and I truly mean a handful, of experts in the world who believed that it was possible, and their perseverance, their expertise, their support in putting governments and communities affected first was a critical part of helping Niger reach that point. And of course, the community cohesion and the leaders from those communities, as I was talking about before, their perseverance and their trust of one another is a critical component as well. And so, we have a staff member, Dr. Daniel Boachi, who's one of those handful of technical experts, and we wanted to honor his commitment, his perseverance. He's been working on this for 50 years. Hands up in the room, who's been working on any one thing for 50 years? Exactly. And so how do you honor that? There's no social media post that can truly do that justice. And so we wanted to engage. We'd never made a documentary film before, but we wanted to choose a medium that was commensurate with that commitment. And so the best we could come up with was something that would endure, would be timeless as a documentary. So the documentary focuses on his expertise, but also critically the work of communities. And so for us, that's our starting point. Tell that story in an authentic way. It's not our story to tell. It's the communities in Niger and Senegal that is following closely on their heels, pursuing elimination. And so, why do we do this? Why do we commit financial resources to simply tell a story? Because we believe, first of all, it's the right thing to do. These are communities who do not have a voice. Those of us who get to come places like this here in Davos, there's no one from that community who will be here. And so, we can help to create a platform to be an ambassador for their commitment and their leadership. But then once we do that well, then you have opportunity. Then you can think about how to take that next step. Then you can think about, okay, maybe there's a campaign that can come from this. Maybe we use it in specific fundraising strategies, etc. And as a result, we are now, it's actually growing in a very organic way. Huge thanks to the Polish Business Hub for hosting a screening of that film on Monday. And we're being asked, it's been featured at film festivals, it's received awards, and it's now being sought out by donors. The pharmaceutical companies who donate the drugs to treat these diseases want to show it to their employees. They're proud of this, they're proud of the impact. And so I think the power of that storytelling is only just beginning to unfold, but because we started in the right place.
Yeah, and these companies are mentioned in the documentary, I've heard, at some point by the professor who's leading these efforts, right? But then I guess it brings scalability of these kind of solutions and replicability in other types of disease areas or even sectors. So it's inspiration, as you said. So it's interesting. Maybe you're kind of like the person in between. Yeah, you could be the person in between. So what kind of barriers can you see between like philanthropic goals and partnership with media? What can go wrong?
Oh, go wrong! Oh no! I was going to tell you all the positive things, and now you put me on the spot on what went wrong. I'm going to tell you a funny story. I was going to say he can't get out of this room, but I think I'm being filmed. So, I've been doing a partnership on against illicit alcohol. So illicit alcohol, over 70% of alcohol consumed in Africa is illicit. So this ethanol that is being distilled in the background and that gets people blind, and that you sell, and that has like 70% content. And we're doing a project in Zambia, and what we're trying to do is to see whether we can put an industry-wide approach with all the beer manufacturers, all the ones that are actually illicit, to come and say, look, let's have a conversation, because this illicit alcohol is not good for your business, but it's not good for the community, because at a very low amount of money, these poor 14 and 15-year-olds are learning to drink, right? So this has huge impact into your cognitive and your physical space. So we've invited the media and the media journalists across Africa to say, come and let's explain together the story around what exactly you need to be able to say. And of course for them, like if you go to Zambia, for example, they'll tell you every alcohol is called beer. So that's a big problem for the illicit alcohol, right? Because it's like, well, the illicit beer and the licit beer, no, not really. There's one called Junta. So to do this distinction, and I think media helps understand and really exactly what you say, taking the messages to a layman perspective, so that we can really figure out. So really partnering with the media and to do that. But then, it ended up being a complete disaster because, we had all sorts of cover where everything was mixed up, and licit and illicit was really a big problem. And then my account got closed in Dubai because they thought I was doing work on illicit alcohol. Anyway, so it's a really, it's a really fine line. And they were saying, well, what is she doing empowering media journalists to talk about illicit alcohol? So it's a very interesting angle to look at that. They are our key partners in change. There is no doubt in my mind. But when done wrong, the harm to society is very, very, very big. And this is why, for example, a lot of the work that we've been doing, and for example, we're funded by an anonymous donor, which I can't share right now, but to work on African voices and voices across the continent that can change, for example, the narrative around sexual reproductive rights. And we've created a teen influencer that is an AI teen influencer. Her name is Fatima. Her mother is from Niger. Her father is from Namibia, and she was born in Cape Verde. So she represents all these free countries, free languages, English, French, and Portuguese, and also local languages. And she talks about the challenges that a young girl will face in terms of, teen pregnancy, HIV contracting, gender-based violence. She talks about what does it mean to have a friend who's from the LGBTQ. And she's saying that, and she's an AI character. So all of a sudden, putting that back into digital media, getting a chatbot that all these young people can speak to her and ask her any questions that they have, and they can talk about, something that would have been very repressed normally, is a great opportunity. It's transformational. And this also gives us a little bit of protection because those issues are difficult to be able to be discussed. So I think bringing that back and thinking about how you bring digital media as an opportunity and then AI enabled to give you a protection, it is not something that is only European. It's also something that allows us to talk about some very difficult issue in our context in Africa. I just wanted to bring that back. It's a double sword problem.
Right. And how do you avoid this kind of miscommunications problem?
Media journalists.
Well, there are lots of processes and compliance processes when we fact check what we are saying. So that's obviously on the news side. But I think that what is really, I think, unique about us, maybe not unique, but something which I think fuels the way we say the stories, is really the different platforms that we can use. Okay. Because stories are very, very powerful when they are told also in not just factual, not just on news, but actually in scripted. This really explains the world because people see it in practice. And obviously we're a commercial broadcaster, we're an entertainer, but we don't stay away from difficult topics as well. Even, in movies, I remember the movie we produced many years ago, which I think was really, was a great movie, but it talked about hate on the internet, called Hater. And how do you create hate? How people are writing hate and increasing those in campaigns, and how that works, where you have special agencies just actually specializing in that, yes? We are tackling violence, which is a big problem in Poland as well, and talking about violence. But what we can do is you can go from scripted to news, you can go from news to scripted. One of the big examples was 25 Years of Innocence, a big movie of ours, a big movie about a guy who was convicted for 25 years in prisons, but he didn't commit a crime. It started on news for us. There was first a news thing, and then we created a movie, and at the end of that, he was acquitted, and he was, So it has an impact, okay? We have a massive impact. Most recently, we had big floods in Poland. Obviously, it's a news story, covered by news. But we saw the level of tragedy that was there. And we thought about what are we going to do about it, okay? How are we going to tackle that? And we know we have a power with our viewers. We organize immediately a fundraising activities. And we raised within, 10 days, $2 million that we gave back to one of the hospitals in the area that was completely demolished. And we just gave it back to rebuild the hospital. So that's, a different approach to different platforms.
Yep. Right. Yeah, this is huge on disaster relief. I've seen that in Spain recently. I live in Barcelona. Valencia, the suburbs of Valencia got destroyed. And the Spanish people massively thanks to radio, TV shows that covered the thing. Even though now it's kind of phasing down, the issues are still there, and but that's in a privileged country, I would say. But then in other settings, it's even harder. So I think we can start taking questions from the floor if anyone has question in the room. And if not, I may have other questions. Or Sam, you wanted to intervene on something? I don't see everyone, so I don't know if someone... It's good. All right. So, do you have any other points that you wanted to make, Sam? Or you could...
Well, perhaps some other examples. I mean, I think a lot of the impact that we hear about, and congratulations, it's an incredible, both of those stories, really incredible. And it's so context specific. It's about the moment, it's about the news cycle, it's about what people are paying attention to, and it's about how and why you are doing what you're doing to give back. And when the combination of those things comes together, I think it's extremely powerful. Something else that Miriam, you talked about the power of African voices, local voices, and we've had the privilege of partnering with William Troost-Ekong, who is the captain of the Nigerian national football team, the Super Eagles. He, through his personal philanthropy, part of that is going to treat communities for neglected tropical diseases in the area of Nigeria where he was born and where his father is from. And so for us, it's a matter, and philanthropy, of course, is a very personal thing. And so it's about appropriately stewarding his desire to give back to a community he has connection to. But we wanted it to be more than just a financial endeavor, because his voice, he's the captain of the national football team in a country that loves football. And so how do you use his voice? How do you use his influence? So we developed a media campaign in partnership with the Ministry of Health, the Federal Ministry of Health, and the State Ministry of Health in Akwa Ibom. And we actually designed a call to action for him to deliver over the radio. You've mentioned radio as well and the importance of that too. And of course, today we have digital versions of that to amplify even more. But we commissioned a study afterwards to look at the true impact of it. And we were able to actually have a measurable impact in terms of the uptake of treatment services by people who attributed their uptake to hearing his voice on the radio. And it's one of the things that the Ministry of Health at that time, this was a few years ago now, was most happy with in terms of the partnership. And they would give them a platform to talk about their national objectives, their strategic plan to tackle these diseases, but to reach their people through a different tone. Through a different opportunity. They were no longer the government talking to the people, they were the partners to their hero. And that made a big difference.
Yeah, and that's the anecdotal evidence, or that's sometimes hard to measure. So I was asking earlier, how do you measure that impact? We don't, as media professionals, we don't necessarily measure that impact, right? We know how many people we've reached, how many people we've have been watching the show, but they don't necessarily tell us what action they've taken after having seen a program or read an article. And so apart from Bill Gates and Melinda Gates on that initial quote I had. But
exactly, unless you have, like in our case where we have our own foundation, yes, and this is, you can measure the impact. One, we measure the impact in a sense how many of the viewers we can move to action, which is unbelievable how many people, but then through transparency and through the things that we do. And we work with a lot of, talking about direct action, we work with a lot of different philanthropic organizations, mostly because we know that our own foundation is specialized in certain things. They're not specialized in something else. So for instance, when the war broke, obviously, when war broke in Ukraine, we immediately started to, again, inform, but we also started to do something. And we were the first ones in Poland to organize a huge fundraising. We organized a concert. But we knew that we cannot put this fund through our foundation. We don't have expertise in working in, refugee zones or the war zones or anything like that. So we formed a partnership with Polska Akcja Humanitarna, which is a specialized foundation in this type of environment, and we gave them all the money that we raised. So it's really about choosing. We, as a TVN foundation, we're now very focused on mental health, and that's really what we raise money for. We just completed, it's opening its doors, I think like we talk on next week or something, a hospital in Poland, first of that kind for youth and adolescents mental health hospital, which has been a single biggest initiative of ours and a single biggest, let's say, infrastructure initiative. And this is where we are, where we create also a discussion around Poland about, those things and so on. But that's what we specialize. But then we support others in what they're at best in.
Right. So through the foundation work, yeah, I get it. But then in terms of collaboration between philanthropic initiatives and media, there is some. Indeed, I think my main takeaways from the conversation today, there are some strategies to adopt, to have partnership, to develop understanding of the issues, to talk about the issues in the right way, to shift the status quo on the storytelling, on how do we position specific topics or people. And but there was also a bit of magic, right? when this guy from read this article in the Financial Times decided to fund the End Fund. That's being at the right time, in front of the right eyes, and so yeah, that's some of my main takeaways from it. But Devex can give an example of what we've done. We do a lot of that. So we have a newsroom that covers global development issues daily. We cover these issues. They sometimes have an impact. You mentioned DFID earlier. That's UK Aid. We have a dedicated reporter talking about what the UK Aid is doing every day. And some of his stories managed to return some of the aid cuts decision that the UK government has done. So in these kind of cases, we can have anecdotal evidence from people within the UK Aid Department, for instance, have communicated that back to the reporter, which is great. Some of his sources, right? But oftentimes we don't have this kind of feedback, right? Or another example was we had a paid partnership with a number of organizations who wanted us to talk about land rights in Africa. Right, and we did a lot of storytelling on that during the entire year, and then it resulted in having the European Commission fund a pilot project with FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, a 10 million fund to start creating land registries and land cadastres in West Africa, and have a pilot project there to start registering the land for people's rights. Right, so there are some evidence like that, but many of the paid partnerships we don't have this kind of anecdotal evidence. They don't always come back to us. So yeah, that's why I think philanthropic organizations and media, we can learn how to best communicate together and learn from each other. Miriam, since we're on Polish TV, do you want to tell a bit more about your book before we wrap up?
Unfortunately, I do not have a Polish version. So, unfortunately, it is only in English. But yes, this book is Brands on a Mission, How to Achieve Social Impact and Business Growth Through Purpose, a foreword by Paul Polman and... Oh, sorry. Yes. Do I have to repeat this whole? Anyway, Brands on a Mission is a business ethics book. It's called, basically the key gist here is how to achieve social impact and business growth through purpose, forward by Paul Polman and John Ruggie. I think you'll find some of your beloved fighter for equality and social justice for business, such as Michael Porter, Emmanuel Faber, also Dr. Natalia Kanem, Richard Zeckhauser from Harvard Kennedy School, and INSEAD. And I think the key thing for us is case studies and really showcasing that it is possible, that business can and will be a force for good if and only if we infuse ethics and values at the heart of the business model. So that's what this book is about. So I hope you get a chance to read it. It's got a little bit about my own stories and why it matters for me personally to have thought about really merging, social justice at the heart of business.
Well, thank you. Any last words from the crowd? We're good. So thank you so much to all of you for your time today, and I think we can close on this, right?